To discuss the current political events in Germany, we have Matteo Garavoglia, a non-resident fellow at the Foreign Policy Program of the Brookings Institution. He joins us from Berlin. Here in our studio, Nicolette Hurd is a journalist, TV host and former member of the Christian Social Union Party. Also from Berlin, Hockenos is a freelance writer and author of several books on European politics, and Federiga Bindi is a senior fellow at the School of Advanced International Studies at Hopkins University here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to all of you. Matteo, let me start with you. Lots to unpack here with the situation in Germany. The election took place almost 2 months ago. Why has it been so hard to form a coalition in the country?
Well, fundamentally, this has been difficult for a number of reasons. The SPD, the Social Democratic Party, had decided originally to go in the opposition because they've been in a grand coalition with Merkel for a number of years, and they've been punished by the voters for that. So Merkel was effectively left with only one option, to try to form a coalition together with the Greens and the Liberals. Now, that turned out not to be possible. The Greens moved quite a lot during the negotiations and were ready to compromise on a number of pledges they made during the electoral campaigns. The Liberal Democrats, the Liberals maybe less so, and coalition talks fell apart.
All right, lots of parties involved there. Nicolette, what does this mean for Chancellor Angela Merkel? There was a report in a German newspaper, Handelsblatt, which said that this is the beginning of the end for Angela Merkel as Chancellor.
That is a very broad statement, but I think in essence it probably rings true. How long the process is going to take, that depends on how events will take shape and how she's able to move past the point where we're now. But I think in a general sense, that is definitely true.
We do have a situation now, though, where the SPD, we just heard the leader, Martin Schulz, saying that he approves more talks now with Angela Merkel's party to try and form a coalition. Does that change anything?
Improving talks, no, but actually I will go back to that a little bit, because there was also a big miscommunication in the sense that it was said, or the media has said, that the SPD had already agreed in order to do talks in regards to a coalition, and that was not the case. And actually Martin Schulz was quite upset about that, because obviously this was not something that should have gone out at the point, and it was not something that really was confirmed at the time.
Paul, let's take a listen to what the Chancellor herself had to say. Let's watch.
New elections are an option, but for a stable country, for a country that has so many challenges to face, the option of a minority government must be considered with caution. I can't say anything today, but I am very skeptical that a minority government is the best solution.
So, Paul, for the sake of clarity, we have the Chancellor here, who's the leader of the Christian Democrat Party, and she's been trying to form this coalition with 3 other parties. What are the issues that divide these parties so much that they just cannot come together?
Well, we have a very historic first ever situation here in Germany with so many different parties, 6 in total in the Bundestag. A far-right party also entered the parliament. There's a far-left and thus a far-right party as well. The centrist parties, actually, there's not that much that divides them. Certainly, there's not much at all that divides the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. And then the 4 party talks that we talked about the Greens and the Liberal Free Democrats and the Christian Democrats and their Bavarian sister party, the CSU. There wasn't that much divided them as well. It was more a matter of electoral tactics and maneuvering that made one of the parties, the Liberal Party, withdraw. And it's also a matter of electoral politics that has the Social Democrats so wary of joining a government with the Christian Democrats. They have been in power 8 out of the past 12 years together with Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats. Every time there's election, every 4 years, they do worse because they're overshadowed by her. Her style is one in which she and her party have been able to take and claim credit for the accomplishments, many of which the Social Democrats feel were rightly theirs. And so that's why Martin Schulz ran on the platform that the Social Democrats were going to go back into opposition, or they're either going to lead the government, which really wasn't a case because they had never, in the polls that showed that they were going to do well enough to do this, or they were going to go into opposition. And he pledged that, he promised that, so it's a promise that he's going to have to go back on now, or at least they're going to have to enter talks to do so. So that's why he is in such an awkward situation.
Paul, what are the options for Chancellor Merkel right now? I mean, does she look at the SPD and say, okay, look, we'll accept some of the conditions that you are putting. We know that the SPD wants a more generous social program in Germany. We know that they want to do more about the environment. Does she now accept all those things?
There haven't been great differences between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats during the two grand coalitions that they were in, and none of the demands that the Social Democrats made on the campaign trail ultimately were ones that Angela Merkel, who's on the left side of the Christian Democrats, couldn't eventually make her own. So that's not really the problem. The problem is, well, there's the Social Democrats themselves. I mean, they've made it clear that they didn't really want to be in the government. And not only that, no matter what happens in talks between Martin Schulz and his party and Angela Merkel, in the end, the members of the Social Democratic Party, they have to approve this. So the party base is going to vote on this. And this is really where where it's going to be decided, I think. So this is so ultimately now there are actually three options. There's one, which is the Grand Coalition. The second one is a minority coalition, and the third is new elections. And that's where we stand right now. And any one of those three could happen.
Matteo, you want to say something?
If I must step in. Just something, yeah, indeed. I think the key issue for the SPD, for the Social Democrats, is to understand whether and to what extent they can set the agenda. Should they be able to set a number of points and set the agenda in terms of policy making and so on, therefore giving the impression to the electorate and to voters and citizens in Germany that Angela Merkel is the chancellor, but actually they are the ones calling the shots,
right,
and pushing through the policies they want. They might be interested in going to a coalition. The question is whether they are cohesive enough, the Social Democrats, to actually pull this off.
Okay, Federiga, let's look at this one option that's been talked about here, and that is new elections. Is that a real option?
I think this is really the last resort, last resort. It comes even after a minority government. The President Steinmeier was very clear that he does not want that, Merkel either. The risk is that if you have new election, you have even more instability, because of course the disaffection that voters have shown vis-à-vis the traditional parties will grow rather than diminish. So I think that the President of the Republic will do anything to avoid this option.
So when you say the smaller parties could get more strength, would we, there's one party which is on the right, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, could they gain in the number of seats they already have?
Well, both of them and Die Linke could gain, yes, because we live in a historical moment where protest parties are attracting voters. And a stalemate like this does not help traditional parties.
Nicolette, the Social Democrat Party, the SPD, it did poorly in the election. Let's take a listen to what Martin Schulz had to say.
With the best will in the world, I cannot tell you what the results of this meeting will be. I can assure you of one thing, that I will fight for the best possible solution for this country, that my party is aware of its responsibility to this country. One thing is certain, we need stability and dependability. What is also certain is that we need change.
What are the options that are there for the SPD?
I think the SPD really has one major problem. First, of course, after the election, they withdrew and they said they were going to go in the opposition. So they do have to make a turn of 180 degrees. Going back now into talks, which is certainly a must. They cannot say we're not going into talks. They have to listen at everything. Everyone at this point really needs to look at all the possibilities that we can possibly have or do in order to form a government. But I think to say that this is sort of a given, that now that the SPD has agreed to have talks and this would automatically lead to a grand coalition, that would be very premature.
Matteo, let's talk about the alternative for Germany, the AfD. It's a populist party on the right. It's a party that actually made a lot of news during that election and in the aftermath of the election. What role do they play? What role would they play in any kind of future coalition? Do they have a role?
Well, no, they do not have a role in the sense that, well, we should be clear. They will have no direct role. No other political party in Germany will ever form a coalition with the Alternative for Deutschland. They'll be kept out of government, and we can be sure about that. Now, having said that, the role that they can play is an indirect one. They are able to nurture a certain kind of political narrative whereby they can, over time, infect and indirectly influence policymaking and political discourse. That's something that they've been doing already. Over the last few months. Indeed, they could do that even more so.
Paul, what is your view on these smaller parties? I mean, there's also the Greens, which are on the left.
Well, first let me say something about new elections, which I agree is the worst possible alternative, and for two reasons as well that weren't mentioned. I mean, I think the biggest is time. I mean, we're already 2 months now after elections. New elections would happen only if talks between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats broke down. Then there'd be a period of campaigning again. At the very earliest, new elections would happen sometimes in the spring. Then there's the possibility that the electoral logic, that the results wouldn't be all so much different than they were 2 months ago. So you basically have the same situation, and then coalition negotiations would begin again. This, we're talking 6 or 7 months now after the original elections. And although things continue to hum along here in Germany quite fine, there's stagnation in Europe, in the EU, and on the international level. There are the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, had been planning, together with Angela Merkel, to launch historic reforms of the European Union, which is in an existential crisis. I mean, he was hoping to have a government in Germany, in Berlin, up and going by now to start undertaking those reforms. So there is an urgency here, and that would new elections would be the worst case scenario in terms of time lag. I mean, as I say, also, I mean, it would also look very bad for the mainstream parties and for Germany as such if there was all of this politicking going on, and then there were new elections, and then basically there were the same results. This alone would help the populist parties who are critical of the democratic elite and the waste of time, and as it's waste of time and a waste of money. So let me just say that about the new elections. As for the smaller parties, and particularly the Greens, I actually think that a minority government between the Christian Democrats and the Greens would be an alternative that's realistic and that would actually be good for Germany. We've had this situation in the country for, as I said, 8 out of the past 12 years where there's been a grand coalition, where there's been a very big majority and the opposition parties have been very small. It's made the parliament less significant. It's kind of created a stale democracy and very, very little discussion. And I think that a minority government in which the government would have to look into the parliament and get an opposition party on its side for passing each piece of legislation would greatly revive and rejuvenate the parliament and the democratic process in Germany. There's never been a German federal government before that's been a minority government.
Right.
And as you heard from that one clip, Angela Merkel, she's very wary of this, as Germans are in general. But I think it would be a very healthy thing for the country.
Okay, Federica?
Yeah, no, I just want to say that the one who is in the hottest shoes right now is Schulz. And because, yes, he has to convince the party in the case he's entering a coalition, but he most of all has to convince himself. I mean, we do not have to forget that Schulz and Merkel don't exactly see eye to eye, also from a personal point of view. Merkel was strong in making sure that he would not get what he really wanted. He was becoming president of the European Commission. So now is sort of payback for him, and if he has to enter in a coalition with her, possibly being her junior, it's really a tough one for him to solo. But on the other side, Steinmeier, who is the president of the Republic, is a socialist, and he clearly said that the SPD has to negotiate. So he's really between a stone and a hard rock, and in addition, having led the least successful elections of entire history of Germany for the socialists.